Hi, Founder fans. Jason here. Thank you so much for coming to our second installment of watching Hamilton the Broadway play live and on camera. We are going to be doing what we did last week, watching the second act of the Broadway play Hamilton, and I will comment on some of the history, some of the inaccuracies, or it's mostly pretty accurate, so I'll comment on that, and maybe add a few things here and there that are not mentioned. Give it a little perspective, so to speak. Thank you for coming. I'm the only one here. Well, thank you, Google Gamer Girl 2002. Someone else has joined us. People are going to join along the way. We'll take a second or two. It's a long time, so I'm sure people will come and go as we go. Right now, I am going to start I can't show it on here. As I said last week, Disney will sue me, and there will be no more Founder of the Day. So if you have Disney Plus, we can start it at the same time. I am currently at the intermission, and it says 0 time left in intermission. So if you want to, what we're going to do is right when I hit the 3-minute mark here, so we give people some time to get in here and catch up a little bit, because see, people are starting to trickle in. As people come in, at the 3-minute mark, I will hit go, and we will, if you want to, hit the button with me. So get to the 0-second mark of intermission. Until then, we'll chit-chat a little bit. I am going to be wearing my headphones, which means my volume will probably be different than it should be, but, usually I'm just talking, but the headphones squeeze me out, and I sound weird. Thank you, everyone, for coming. If you want to hit like, I would really appreciate that. We'll chit-chat for a minute or two as we get, like I said, we're going to hit the 3-minute mark. I'm going to count down, 3, 2, 1, and we will go. Okay? Great. If you had any questions or comments about maybe the first one that you may have missed, or things you want me to talk about in this, let me know. That's what I'm here for. Let's add some perspective to the revolution right here. So I am going to let my cat out of the room real quick, and then we'll continue. Nope, I got tricked. I got tricked by my cat. Stupid cat. Anyway, I'm gonna put the headphones on because we are coming up to it. Let's go. Don't want to knock anything down. And I am going to take a quick sip of coffee because I'm about to be talking for an hour and a half. So I don't want to go dry. Thank you guys so much for coming. I appreciate it. We are about 15 seconds left until we get to it. So we'll wait patiently. And then once that hits, I'm going to hit go. And we will chit-chat about the American Revolution and Alexander Hamilton's role in it. And we are at, 3 minutes. So let's start. Ready? 3, 2, 1, engage. And now they're going to say, was it 1789 now? When the second act starts. And here's Aaron Burr. Let me turn it up so I can hear over myself talking. Unite the colonies through more debt. I love that line because that's essentially what he does. We currently live in Alexander Hamilton's America. We have a national debt still. There were certain people along the way who tried to get rid of it. But yeah, he basically used the national debt to establish credit internationally while assuming the nation's debt, the individual states' debts, to make it one United States. And here's Thomas Jefferson, who I missed throughout the first act, although Lafayette's a great character also. Now, I personally am a gigantic Thomas Jefferson fan. Would have probably voted for him if I were alive back in the day. And a wealthy white male. What's up, Nachos? Welcome to the live stream. We literally just started. We are just at the beginning of Jefferson coming. I forget the name of the songs. Jefferson singing "What Did I Miss?" So if you want to fast forward and catch up. Helped Lafayette write the Declaration. That's right. Thomas Jefferson was in France when the French Revolution broke out. It's very hard to overlook. He was also, along with John Adams, in France when the United States Constitution was written. So when he's here singing What Did I Miss, you missed a whole lot, Mr. Jefferson. Thank you for assembling our foreign affairs, but I guess I basically missed the late 80s. Great line. So yeah, he came home to a new government. He was the governor of Virginia when Virginia was its own nation, more or less. All the separate states were nations. He makes a great reference here. He says, Sally B. Lambda won't open the letter. He's talking to Sally Hemings, who was the slave who he now famously had children with. It's a very smart reference, although, of course, people have recently been criticizing the play for not being woke enough. But that's a very quick but important hint at Sally Hemings' their relationship. Let me see. I saw a question come in. My friend James Madison. Yeah. So he's gone, and James Madison isn't just his friend, but essentially Jefferson was a mentor to several people, and Madison was one of these people. So when he comes home and says he's red in the face, hey man, I wrote this Constitution while you were gone. Don't know if you like it. And Jefferson, overall liked the idea of it. He was a nationalist. I wouldn't call him a federalist because that's what the opposing political party was named. But in essence, he was kind of a federalist. He did think we needed he would be Secretary of State because of all the time he spent internationally, and he knew from a foreign affairs perspective, uniting was the best way to go. But there were certain parts of the Constitution he was like, dude, what's this? Head first into the abyss. There was a question. Off topic, do I love old cars 1919 to 1940? I certainly wouldn't consider myself a gearhead. Although I guess 1940, not really gearheads. I'm super interested in old cars. I love the really old Model Ts. I once got to touch a steam-powered car, which was super cool. And it is very off topic, so I won't go too into it, but I'm interested in them. I like cars from the 1950s, though, if I'm being honest. Alright, so Thomas Jefferson has been introduced now. He missed a lot, as we said, but he comes in. Washington brings him in as Secretary of State because he knows how important his mind is. He knows how important he is knowing foreign affairs, but there's still a debate going on as to what the Secretary of State does. It was obviously supposed to be for foreign correspondence and what we do with foreign nations, but does the Secretary of State also handle domestic affairs? They didn't know at the time. Actually, Charles Thompson tried to be another Secretary of State. Now, the rap battle's great. I don't love that they use the microphone, because, it's so out of character for the 17th century. 18th century, but this song is one of several songs in this play in the second act that is the best interpretation of the debates had during the George Washington administration that I've ever seen. Movies, cinema, television, in books, I've never heard anyone interpret the George Washington administration as several of the songs in this act do, including these rap battles, the cabinet battles. Because, literally, he sums up these really complicated arguments between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans so nicely. Granted, Jefferson wasn't really having these arguments right away with Hamilton. In fact, Washington didn't call his first cabinet meeting for 2 or 3 years. I think it was 1791, late 1791. And not all of these conversations were being had yet. But again, he's summing them up. Yeah, I guess. I think I did see another comment come in. I have a 1932 Chevy Coupe I'm building. That's really sweet. I'm currently learning how to fix old tractors as opposed to that. The mics are about rap culture. You're right, Sarah, and I understand that, and I understand they're trying to appeal to that crowd. But as I said last week, this is a very traditional Broadway play because Broadway plays traditionally use a wide variety of different musical genres. Granted, this is really one of the first ones to, at least definitely the first major one, to incorporate rap as that musical genre. But, we've heard ballads, we've heard, Jefferson coming back in that first number that's a show tune, man. Like it's not so, and I do appreciate them bringing rap in. There should be a wide variety of musical genres in musicals, and I get it. They're trying to like say like, look, we're incorporating rap, but it's like we can hear it. And that's a fantastic harmony right there. So it's true. Hamilton wanted to put through this new tax plan, treasury plan, but he just didn't have necessarily the support. He needed the support of James Madison, who was, although not a president or not actually one of the leaders, because there were no parties officially at the time. He wasn't actually a leader in the House of Representatives, but he was like the leader of the House of Representatives. He did, write the Constitution they all just ratified and were putting into action. And this seems to be a very good interpretation of Washington's conversation with Alexander Hamilton. I don't know if they would call for his removal, because like Washington chose him and no one was going to call for Washington to do anything. That's a bold statement. But they would publicly declare how unhappy they were. And there were certainly many papers who were against Alexander Hamilton and the Federalist Party. Both parties, as they were emerging, because right now, the first parties are emerging. You have the Federalist Party, which the Federalists were, when the Constitution was written, Hamilton and Madison wrote the Federalist Papers, and people who wanted the Constitution became known as Federalists. And people who didn't like the new Constitution, of which there were many, many people, and it was a very close race in many states, they became known as Anti-Federalists. The Federalists held on to that title into the Washington administration through the Adams and Jefferson and even Madison administrations. But the Anti-Federalists transitioned to what were called the Republicans. Now, we currently call them the Democratic Republican Party because they are not the Republicans we know today. They're more directly descended from the Democratic Party, but also nothing like the Democratic Party today. So we consider them Democratic Republicans. A song about Hamilton writing and working too hard. I'm not going to comment too much on this because the conversations between Alexander Hamilton and his wife in private, in confidence, we don't know. You have to take some artistic liberties when you're making a play like this. And a play that's 2.5 hours, you have to do more than just talk politics. I absolutely understand that. Not necessarily what interests me, but I understand it. This gentleman is now playing his son. It was John Lawrence in the first one. Forgive me, I don't know all the actors' names. He does a pretty good job as a kid. I'm surprised. He's 9 years old, and he's as tall as his father. I'm surprised they didn't do like some kind of camera trick where like they cut off his, had him down on his knees behind some kind of it's personal preference. If I were directing Hamilton. Now they want to go up to Philip Schuyler's house, who's her father, who again I've referenced last week is the one whose statue they just removed in Albany. Now, this is a letter. I have not read this particular letter, but this is, if not a direct translation, it's at least a summation of an actual letter that they wrote to each other. Again, they talk a lot about the sexual tension between Angelica Schuyler and Alexander Hamilton. And the thing is, they used different language back then. They used more flowery, poetic language, especially in their writing. And remember, Hamilton isn't the only person who was writing all the time, as this play indicates. All of these people, not all these people, all of the leaders of America, the wealthy who had the time and opportunity to do so, they would wake up in the morning and read some books, and then they'd read some letters that were sent to them, and then they'd write some letters and read more letters and write more letters. They were writing all the time. All of them. That's how you communicated. You couldn't just go on YouTube, Now they're coming back. I saw some comments come in. Hamilton was first to be called to be censured, though. That's right. Yes, Hamilton was early censured. Anthony Ramos is the actor who plays. Thank you so much. I apologize, Mr. Ramos, for forgetting your name. Uh, I know Lin-Manuel Miranda's name, and that's more or less where I'm at. And John Goth was the king, right? I only remember that because it's short and easy. Just came all this way. Take a break. I can't take a break. We're filling time. Hamilton was called to be censured. Off the top of my head, I don't remember a ton about the censure in particular, but he quickly became public enemy number one for the anti-federalists, who at this point were becoming what they called Republicans again, but we call it Democratic Republicans. It's hard to... I got the music running through my head right now. It's hard to keep talking and have someone else talking in my ears. I'm going to take a quick sip of my coffee so I don't lose my life. Did I see something else come in? No, not yet. He's trying to get his plan through Congress. Again, they're going to go, I think... Is this when the Seductress comes in? Yeah, okay. Talk a little about the Reynolds affair. Because this song is a little risque. I don't want to cover too much of it. We're trying to be family friendly here. Reynolds, this is a really accurate portrayal of the Reynolds, the whole thing. Is like, he basically does get seduced by her. They make it seem like she didn't have as much to do with it as it seems like she did. It seems like the plan was from the beginning for her to snake Hamilton into this thing. And she is not Peggy anymore. The character I just don't love. I will say, not to go back to the first week, but having only listened to the play before this was released last week, I just hated Peggy coming in with like the "and Peggy," and I really appreciate it. I don't know if you guys listen to this, but when we're done here, you should go find the Weird Al Hamilton polka. If you've not heard it, he does one of his Weird Al montages and put them all together. I know it sounds weird. I'm recommending Weird Al on a History Channel, but he really nails the like "and Peggy." But this character is better, even though she's a villain now. But I will say, seeing Peggy on stage and seeing how she's the sister who's trying to be like, come on, like, let's behave, it makes a lot more sense than, like, when you hear it, I just pictured her, like, chirping and be like, oh, I'm here too. It's very interesting how seeing it has changed how I interpreted what I heard. Part of me would recommend people in the future to listen to it a bunch of times before seeing it, so you can make your own interpretation. Also, what's not in the play from the first act is John Laurens. He dies in the first act. Spoiler alert! He dies in the first act, and they show it, but they don't, on the soundtrack, that brief song is not there. So I was like, why don't they kill off, they don't explain why he's not in the second act. They kind of explain Lafayette went back to France. I guess they don't explain a lot about Hercules Mulligan. He kind of vanishes too. But let's see. Okay, and here is, what's his name? Mr. Reynolds blackmailing Alexander Hamilton. And, yeah, he cheated on his wife, got blackmailed for it. Most founders had major flaws. I used to hate on Alexander Hamilton a lot when I was a younger man, and I wasn't doing such a great job of being objective when I spoke about the American Revolution. I used to not be the biggest Alexander Hamilton fan, I'll be honest. When he's the one who got a play, when I first found out about that, I was very unhappy, and I hoped it was terrible. Fortunately, I've come around, and it's amazing. Especially some of the politics they talk about. That being said, it is very important to remember that even the founders at the top of the elite, the highest ranking founders, had major character flaws. They were normal people like you or I, and had major character flaws. Maybe having affairs and getting blackmailed isn't normal. Maybe that's a gross overestimation on my part. But you understand my point here, is they were just people. Brilliant people, some of them, Hamilton, Jefferson, Washington, but people. I guess except kind of Washington. Like, again, as I pointed out last week, he was, these are his rules of civility. They are for the most boring person in the world, and he followed them pretty much to a T. Okay, the news about General Mercer. This is in the early 1790s. He was killed, I think, in the 1770s during the war. General Mercer. He led the flying camp, which was meant to, as opposed to the most of the army, which moved as fast as it could, the flying camp was supposed to say, go, and they could pick up and move no matter where they were and get there quickly. So he is an amazing, he was an amazing character. He was killed during the war, became a martyr to the cause. And there was the Mercer tree, I think in New Jersey. Oh, I should have looked into that. Okay, and the Mercer tree is the tree he died under. Decisions are happening under dinner. Now this, The Room Where It Happens, is one of the songs I was talking about that is an amazing interpretation of the Jeffersonian, the Washington administration. Yeah, so, dude, Jefferson, again, was a little out of the loop because he'd been in France for 5 years. And he comes back and Hamilton's like, can you help me talk to Madison? I know Madison will listen to you. So Jefferson, we don't know what happens in The Room Where It Happens. We don't know their conversation. We don't know what happened. But we do know that Jefferson organized the dinner, as I say, the seating, the menu. And he was kind of the moderator between Hamilton, who he didn't know really at all. Like, there's indications they had met a few times over the years before Jefferson went to France, but briefly, and not to get to know each other at all. Madison, on the other hand, knew Hamilton very well, and they couldn't agree on anything. So Jefferson said, I'll act as a mediator, and they did. It still shocks me that Hamilton came out with, like, I can do whatever I want with the Treasury. I can take all the state's debts and create banks and start the stock market and all this. And Madison's like, we'll get the capital in Maryland, I guess? Like, doesn't seem like a great deal. You would have to assume Jefferson was trying to play along. Because Hamilton and Jefferson, it's a little deceiving because they already had the first rap battle where they're arguing about things. But the truth is, they hadn't really gotten into that discussion yet. Again, Washington's cabinet hadn't really met yet. And they Madison is, however, running I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought because I love this song so much. Madison's trying to get things moving, and Hamilton's trying to get things moving. So Jefferson comes in and plays negotiator. It's possibly the most important decision ever made. And I'm going to grab a book here that I think I also mentioned last week. It's called Founding Brothers. This is the book you start the American Revolution with. It's by Joseph J. Ellis. I read it 2 decades ago. It's about six events in American history. And one of them is the dinner, as he calls it. And he goes into a lot of depth on that. But it's super easy to read. It's not like for a younger audience, but like, people even in their teenagers. This is a great book for. A great book for any fan of the American Revolution, though. It also actually talks about the duel. So, it doesn't matter where you put the capital, because New York has the banks, and that's where the money runs. I don't know if Hamilton specifically said that. I don't know if he specifically thought that. But there's a good chance he did, because 3 years later, the New York Stock Exchange opens up in New York City. Just before Hamilton resigns his position and goes home. Well, about a year and a half before Hamilton resigns his position and goes back to New York. What do you want, Burr? He wants to be in the room where it happens. Spoiler alert. He gets there. But they don't let him participate. We will get there. And this dude is, again, someone else whose name I forget, the Aaron Burr actor, has an unbelievable voice. And the exact same smile as one of my friends, my friend Tom Helfrich. They have exactly the same smile. Hold your nose and close your eyes. Let's see, any other questions coming in? Not yet. You guys feel free to ask questions or anything about the play. Again, for anyone joining us, we're currently right in the middle of the room where it happens. Not the middle, closing on the end of the room where it happens. And Burr, Aaron Burr gets such a bad name in American history. Because he murdered Hamilton. And it's like, well, they agreed to the duel. And again, Burr becomes the third vice president of the United States. As far as vice presidents of the United States go, it's John Adams, then Thomas Jefferson, then Aaron Burr. You don't just weasel your way in there. In fact, he was in the Senate for quite some time, as I think we're about to discuss. He runs against... Hi, Muscle Man. Yeah, you made it. Philip Schuyler lost his Senate seat to Aaron Burr. It was Hamilton's father-in-law, a major general in the Continental Army, one of the highest-ranking major generals, a humongously important person. Now, Aaron Burr, as I was saying, he had fought actually in the same campaign to Quebec, although Schuyler got sick and left, probably due to his gout. Aaron Burr, at 19 years old, was fighting in the Revolution and had some heroics of his own. Now Hamilton's confronting Burr and saying, how are you a Democratic Republican? He's like, they'll vote for me. Essentially. Because New York, they're running in New York State. New York was a swing state at the time. And you're right, Matthew. There was that treason for Aaron Burr. I'll tell you what, I will comment on that in a minute. But, yeah, New York was a swing state. I know it's hard for us to believe now where New York is solidly in one party, but we're not going to talk about modern politics. But it was a swing state, and that's why the Federalist Papers were written in New York, to convince New York to vote. And New York was a very close vote. It was only about like 10, 15 votes that they accepted the Constitution. So therefore, you have Aaron Burr, who's like a Federalist. He can change over to Democratic Republican pretty easily in New York because there's so many people who will vote for you. And it worked. And he ran for Senate, so people weren't voting. At the time, you didn't vote for Senate. That wasn't until the 1900s. Senators used to be appointed by the state governments. So his campaign was more of a, hey man, choose me. Not like everyone vote for me, choose me. So we're in the middle of the rap battle. I missed a good portion of the second rap battle. But I love this one because Jefferson is saying, hey, so we're just going to let New York run all the banks? Like, you're going to, we already paid our debts. Now, he makes a good point here that, like, you paid your debts off because you don't pay for labor is true. There's a huge, huge heavy lifting of truth to it. But Virginia also had the most people and was the most powerful state. Another state that was very close to not ratifying the Constitution. There was like 300 people or so who voted in Virginia for ratification, and it only passed by 10 votes. So, like, just to put an emphasis on how closely Virginia was to not accepting the Constitution. Without Virginia, there was no Constitution. It was that important. The fact that Virginia wouldn't want to necessarily throw in all their finances with the federal government makes a lot of sense. In a fashion, being objective, so does Hamilton's idea. To, like, we're one nation, let's use all our money, put it together, we can pay off everyone's debt, and we'll establish credit internationally, which can help us build trade and make us a powerful country. And it did. A lot of Hamilton's plans did lead 100, 150 years later to America being the America we know today, and an international powerhouse when it comes to economic policy. Okay, now, so we have the first rap battle, and then the room where it happens, and then the second rap battle, and now we're going into having Washington on Your Side. So these are the first four, I'll count them as we go, 4 songs that just demonstrate what it was like in the Washington administration. It's also my favorite song. Mr. Mussman, you asked me my favorite song. This is my favorite song. so we smack each other in the press. We don't put retractions. That's true. Although, the Democratic Republicans, as I was saying earlier, did a lot more of the smacking in the press. They were better at it. It was propaganda, and they were better at it. He's asking for someone to take him to task. Somebody get me some dirt on this guy so we can make a big deal about it. Now, was Jefferson actually saying this? Not specifically. He had people do that for him. Thomas Jefferson at this point had emerged as the leader of the Democratic Republican Party. You don't do things yourself when you're in charge. You delegate that responsibility. It must be nice to have Washington on your side. Here's Madison. I was like, where's Madison? Which I wrote. That's weird. Comes off weird in the song, but James Madison did write the Bill of Rights, and they snuck that in there. There were other people who helped and were much involved. So he's doubled the size of the government. Wasn't the trouble with much of our previous government size? Yeah, it was. It was very much part of the problem. Might still be, but we don't talk about modern politics here. Trying to douse, you can't put it out from inside the house. That's a great line. This is Jefferson deciding, like, you know, I'm complicit. I'm involved with Washington administration, and that's essentially the conclusion he comes to, and that's why he leaves. One of the reasons. I mean, publicly it was, I'm retiring. I've been working for a decade in France, and now going to Philly. Well, France, then New York, and then it moves to Philly before Washington, D.C. is even built, and he just wants to go home. And here they are deciding. So they do file the money. Now, I won't get too ahead into it. I did see some things come in. It must be nice. Hurricane is my... Oh, knocked down my arm here. Hey, it's okay. Thank you for coming. Hurricane is my favorite because it claimed... I love some rap. I love the election of 1800. Yes. The election of 1800 is a lot of fun. We're going to get there. You know, it's okay. Is that a Michael Malice reference? Is your handle a Michael Malice reference? Is that a meme? I think it is. I'm going to assume it is. Okay. We were at 4. This is the 5th important song when it comes to understanding the Washington administration. Because Washington's about to explain why he resigns. Now, he didn't announce to Hamilton he's going to resign the day that Thomas Jefferson resigned, which I believe was in 1794. He still had a few years left. You know, Washington does decide he's going to leave the presidency, but it's later. Again, artistic license, got to do that kind of thing. I get it. Now, they say he's running for president. They keep saying, I'm not running for president, he's running for president. They weren't running for president. At the time, you didn't run for president, you stood for it. Which meant when people put your name in the hat, you did not say you would not accept. That's a lot of knots. Let me do that again without the double negative. You stood for it, so if someone put your name in the hat, you would keep your mouth shut. If you didn't want the position, you would say, no, I'm not going to, no, don't vote for me. But no one really said that, because it was President of the United States of America. Sure. There was no campaigning. There was campaigning of sorts. People would campaign for you. In the newspapers, mostly. There wasn't canvassing. You didn't give speeches. You just accepted the position if it came to you. And now, one last time, they're singing about this last speech of... they're singing about this one last speech from George Washington's final, like... sayonara to the nation, and it does become extremely important. And again, this is a very important moment. Washington sets the two-term precedent that was only broken once by FDR a lot later. And this is he's the song's hard for me to listen to. This is the song that gets to me when I listen to it. Because George Washington was, you know, as I've said before, you don't want to talk about great man history. For a very long time, historians would talk about great man history. They would They would write about how, like, one person, George Washington, started the United States, and that's that. And in the field of history, people don't like to do that anymore. We like to look at a variety of people. For example, there are channels like mine where I look at obscure founders and their relationship to the American founding. And that's kind of a trend in the last 15, 20 years in the field of history in general. But if there were a great man in the United States, it was George Washington, because his decision to go home and sit under his fig tree as he did, in the image of Cincinnatus of ancient Greece and or Rome. I'm not a big ancient history student, but essentially the idea is Cincinnatus won the war and then retired instead of becoming dictator. Washington had already done that after the war, and then he decides to do it again. And it's extraordinarily important that Washington resigns, not just for the two terms precedent he set, but because Washington dies 2 years after he leaves office. If Washington had stayed for a third term, he would have died in office, and the precedent, instead of 2 terms, would not have been 3 terms. The precedent would have been you become president until you die in office, or are voted out. But as long as you keep being voted in, you would have stayed until you died, like FDR did, essentially. And that's, once we saw that, that's why they made the whatever amendment, I don't recall, after FDR died, saying you only get 2 terms, because, oh wait, that's why Washington retired. You know? Yeah, and he's saying, yeah, it's hard for me to watch this, because it is, he's literally saying goodbye, like, to a lifetime of work, which is sad enough on its own. But the fact that he's saying we can't just expect one person to save the day. I will not be here forever. We need to take someone else. When they take John Adams, they do kind of skip over a lot of John Adams. Because they do, I'll talk about it now. So, Hamilton leaves Washington's cabinet, and Jefferson leaves Washington's cabinet, and several people leave Washington's cabinet, and they're replaced. And Hamilton has such a strong hold on Washington's decision-making. Not a hold, but he's such an influence over the decisions that are made, that the people who come in to replace him and replace Jefferson, they all come together, and they end up essentially all being Federalists. Specifically, not Henry Dearborn, Timothy Pickering? And, oh my goodness, why is the name escaping me? Oh man. I'm gonna bring it up because it bugs me. I can't remember. Washington cabinet. I'm gonna be so ashamed of myself because I know the name. It's on the tip of my tongue. Oh, this is a great song. The King's Back. Cabinet. It is Timothy Pickering and James McHenry. They essentially go into the Washington administration. I will come back to this, but I want to focus on the songs. King George is kind of singing this song on behalf of everyone, and not just Britain, but Americans are like, who's going to take over? And they get John Adams. John Adams? John Adams? I know him. He's the one, John Adams was the first minister to Great Britain, and he went and spoke directly to King George. Watch the John Adams miniseries for a great interpretation of their interaction. They're going to eat him alive. Like, that's essentially what happens, is Adams tries to be a Washington of sorts, where he's neutral and above it all. And therefore everyone starts going at him. They'll tear each other into pieces. That kind of happened, but not really. Apparently, we're still here. So, back to the John Adams administration. John Adams wants to keep things the way they are. He wants to continue being, continue Washington's administration, essentially. So he brings in the same cabinet. Notably, Timothy Pickering and, what was it, James McHenry? James McHenry, who was Secretary of War and Secretary of State. And they are right in his ear the whole time. And therefore, Adams kind of gets in a lot of trouble Oh man, I didn't realize the king stayed on stage dancing. To the Adams administration. Okay, so this is the, I guess, what are we up to? Number 6 song of the Washington administration. Although we're talking about the Adams administration. He doesn't fire Hamilton. That is wrong. Hamilton had already resigned and been replaced. Oliver Ellsworth, was it? Not Ellsworth. Oliver Wolcott Jr., whose father was a signer of the Declaration. Hamilton is cornered, whatever. We'll get back to that. But Adam keeps listening to his advisors as he thought George Washington would do. But they keep his advisor just telling him Hamilton stuff. And eventually, he gets sick of just being pushed into the Federalist Party because he's still trying to be friendly with now Vice President Thomas Jefferson, who he's been friends with for 25 years since they wrote the Declaration together. But they're being torn apart because Adams is listening to the Federalists. Jefferson is running his own party and kind of talking trash to the papers against Adams. Now, so things don't work out well for Adams. Now, they're confronting Hamilton about the Treasury, and he's about to admit to his affair. This happened, but it was not these 3 people. Actually, it was the group was led by James Monroe, future President of the United States, James Monroe. So not future President of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, and not future President of the United States, James Madison, and not future Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr. It's future President of the United States, James Monroe, with 2 other people. I want to say Rufus King. Let me double check before I say that. I will look that up. So Hamilton is about to explain, like, no, that's not exactly how it went. I am just pulling up. I know there's other people. I just want to make sure I get it right. Okay. They are nobodies. Abraham Venable and Frederick Muhlenberg. Muhlenberg, I believe, participated in the war. I know his brother was a preacher who did what's it called? He had a lot to do with the Revolutionary War itself. Hamilton did verify that he didn't steal from the United States. Now, we'll give Hamilton that. He did not steal from the United States. He was trying to build the United States, specifically the Treasury Department. But he does come out with the Renov pamphlet. That's real. He really did publish about his affair to the world. But he realizes basically what they say here is like, people know about it now. People are going to find out. It's not going to stay silent. You think that James Monroe, who now is a firm Democratic Republican, would go on to be in the Madison administration and be president during the era of good feeling? Think he's going to keep that secret? No, dude. He's not. So, excuse me. This is the Eye of the Hurricane. Mr. Musselman, I believe you said this is your favorite song. Great song. Little slow for my taste. But it fits very nicely into the essence of the play. And in fact, what's really cool about this song is how he ties the entire play together. Because he essentially starts from the beginning. Remember, as he references in the very first act, very first song, they talk about how he put a pencil to his brain, a temple, and connected it to his brain and wrote his first refrain. He wrote about a hurricane that had hit the island he was living on in the Caribbean as a boy. And that demonstrated to the world how intelligent he was, though already he was essentially running a shipping warehouse. And like he says here, wrote my way out. Again, the play really focuses a lot on Hamilton's writing and his ability. Don't get me wrong, Hamilton could write very well. He wrote the Federalist Papers. He also wrote the, my memory is slacking today. Defense of, it's not the Sentinel, because I'm writing about the Sentinel and that's what's on my mind, but that's totally different. I will bring it up. Hamilton, I'm going to look it up once my computer wants to load. It's moving slow because I got a play running. I'm going live on YouTube. Hamilton, Jay Treaty. He wrote a defense of the Jay Treaty, which was very important. He would write a lot. He helped he helped organize the Constitution, though he was not an author of the Camillus Defense. How do I forget the Camillus Defense? Camillus is the next town over that I used to live in. How can I forget? The Camillus Defense was a long defense of the Jay Treaty, which was much hated. And actually, if there's one thing they leave out of Hamilton, and I'm talking about what a good job they do with the Washington administration, they totally leave out the Jay Treaty. When Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay, goes to England while he's Chief Justice and negotiates this treaty, which didn't work out so great. And while he's in Europe, is elected Governor of New York. He is sitting Chief Justice of the United States in Britain, negotiating a treaty, and is elected Governor of New York, which is just a fascinating turn of events. Excuse me. But yeah, I also really like the Reynolds Pamphlet song. The beat is amazing. Let me take a sip. I like how these are the guys reading it. For purposes of improper speculation. See, that's how they used to write. These are the words from the pamphlet. With his knowing consent. Ugh, tough. Is there any questions coming up? Matthew, he wouldn't have gotten pneumonia. That's why I saw the pop-up before. Yeah. Washington, I mean, he might have gotten pneumonia. He's getting a little old for the time. Ain't never gonna be president now. See, Alexander Hamilton was never going to be president because he's not a natural-born citizen of the United States. Bugs me about this song. Excuse me. Bugs me about this song. Love this beat. Like the idea of this song. And again, as someone who used to, not be so unbiased, I love Hamilton never being president now. But he couldn't be president. Part of me is surprised they let him be so high in the cabinet. But again, this was a time where essentially none of these people were natural-born citizens. They were all natural-born citizens of Great Britain. Putting that aside, Hamilton was not born in what would become the United States. So therefore, I mean, I'm sure if he wanted to, he could have made an argument and tried, but no. What's actually interesting is he's so divisive a character. I'm surprised Jefferson becomes president because he is also pretty much just as divisive a character, although he didn't directly make enemies like Hamilton did. Hamilton would say things to your face. Jefferson would talk behind your back. You ever see somebody ruin their own life? I mean, he did get a little bit of respect out of it because he was being honest. And I mean, the fact that Hamilton would show up and say, "Hi, I'm going to ruin my marriage to prove I'm not a corrupt politician." There was an undercurrent of respect for that move. Although, at a time where, you couldn't get a divorce without proving infidelity, granted there was some infidelity, but at a time where divorce wasn't really a thing, they also looked down on him for being kind of a jerk. And I'm not one to judge people, but people would still look down on you for that kind of thing. Right or wrong. Any comments coming in? My sister hated it, but I love it, especially on stage. They're just having a blast. Excuse me. Muscle Man, you're talking about, I don't know the name of the song, Never President Now, or is that the one you're talking about? Because, yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a fun, upbeat song. And then it gets followed by super sad, super bummer, Eliza Schuyler Hamilton. So since I don't really want to comment on what her feelings were when she read in the newspaper her husband had cheated on her, I will instead talk a little bit about Eliza Schuyler, who one of the few people who have published a guest article on founderoftheday.com is Jesse Sir Filippi, one of my friend over at the Schuyler Mansion in Albany, New York, where Hamilton and Eliza were married. She wrote about Eliza Schuyler Hamilton and her adventurous side. She seemed to be pretty adventurous throughout her life. In fact, after Hamilton dies, one of her sons moves out to Wisconsin, and she goes out with a daughter to visit them. And they hang out, and she goes on an event. She's old, 70s, maybe even 80s. And she's like the one who's saying, no, let's climb more mountains. Like, let's keep going. I should have put a link in the description to think about, but go to founderoftheday.com and check it out. Great article. I've also interviewed Jesse here about Deborah Reynolds on this channel, which I'm hoping we can do again. You. Let's see, anything else coming in? Yeah, Reynolds pamphlet is a lot of fun. You are right, sir. Take a quick sip of my iced coffee. Thank you, Emily Manders, for making me some iced coffee right before I spent an hour and a half chit-chatting on the interweb. She's still really sad. I like to talk about history, and there's not a lot of historical context I can talk about with this lady whose heart is broken. I mean, I can relate. Did not have children when my heart was broken. I was a young man where that was more of a thing. Now I like to consider myself more mature and would deal with things like a grown-up. Though I'm very fortunate in my private life. Still super sad. I don't know what I believe there was something I said I'd get back to and I forgot. I apologize for that. Feel free to remind me. Because my favorite line is coming up soon. Oh no, they kill off the sun, don't they? Oh, but I can talk a lot about George Eaker and the duel once that starts. We're just kind of biding our time right now. Not what you signed up for. This is more or less dead air. Sorry. Didn't do a lot of preparation. Just listened to the soundtrack for a few years and watched it, the video last week. Great, it's over. Here it comes. George Eaker. So, there's a few things. I want to pull up the name, but so Hamilton's son grows up quickly in the play. He seems to have been a little bit cocky, like his father, as we say here. Excuse me. Now, so we're George Eaker. His father was from outside Albany. He was a Palatine German, I believe is the right word. There was a group of Germans who lived together, and George Eaker came from here. He was super smart. I'm just looking up the name of the Price. What's the first name? Price. Stephen Price. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I just want to make sure I have the name right. So, he doesn't just come up and meet him in the theater. He does meet him in the theater. That's correct. But he doesn't just come up and say, hey, let's duel. So, George Eaker grew up upstate New York. He's very smart. At a young age, comes down and becomes a lawyer. A very young age. He studies under Henry Brockholst Livingston, part of the Livingston family, who would go on to be on the Supreme Court of the United States. He becomes a lawyer, and he joins Tammany Hall. Yes, you've heard the name Tammany Hall, and it's more famous for the mid-1800s, where it was like the corrupt system that ran New York. Well, that was started by Aaron Burr in the 1790s. It wasn't that corrupt at that point. It was just essentially a New York political party machine. But it wasn't like a machine yet. It was just sponsoring politicians in New York. And George Eaker becomes involved with this party. Because of this, Eaker is given a 4th of July speech. He makes his way up the political ranks, still in his early 20s, and gives a 4th of July speech. And he says, hey, look at me. You know, by all accounts, it seems that this speech was primarily about patriotism. And that's it. Now, he was a Democratic Republican. And the Federalists at the time, like we can relate to today, really didn't like anything the Democratic Republicans had to say. And some of these people interpreted his speech as an attack on the Federalists, including Alexander Hamilton. Now, even most of the Federalists didn't interpret it this way, but Philip Hamilton and his friend Stephen Price didn't like this. So they challenged him to a duel. Now, we only get the one duel here with Philip Hamilton. But George Eaker dueled 2 dudes in 2 days. First, he met Stephen Price. And they exchanged 2 volleys each. No one was hurt, and they called it. The next day, George Eaker goes back, and Philip Hamilton is there. And he's like, I'm all done. And he kills the second guy, who was Philip Hamilton. And part of me is surprised they didn't include that. But we're talking about the Hamiltons here. Oh, that would have probably slowed down the story, so I get it. But it's an amazing story, and I can't believe they left it out. George Eaker would go on to do several things, including starting a volunteer firefighter company. And unfortunately, while he was putting out a fire, he got rained on and caught pneumonia and died also at a very young age. It's a shame, despite how this play makes him out. They actually don't make him look that bad in this play. They kind of leave him alone after he shoots the guy, but he wasn't a bad guy, really at all. In a fashion, he was a patriot. That's George Eaker. I have an article on there called 2 Duels in 2 Days. I suggest you read it. Yeah, I'm saying a lot now. I apologize. It's been an hour and a half. And he's dying now. And it's, spoiler alert, not going to end well for him. I'm sorry. It's cold-blooded. It's been 200 years. Is it too soon? I'm sorry. Let's see. Are there any questions coming in? Oh, there are a few people asking some questions I missed. The Quasi-War is missing here. That happened after the Reynolds pamphlet, so it didn't ruin Hamilton's career like the song suggests, but added with Adams' pamphlet pretty much did. That's a good point. They don't talk about the it's written in front of me and I can't say it. XYZ affair. Thank you, Tarrant. You're absolutely right. If she found out about the Hamilton-Lawrence love letters. Matthew Nyland. Okay, I know what you're talking about. You are referencing... So real quick, I will talk about that. The love letters between Hamilton and Lawrence. And I know that there... I want to be very careful with my words here because there are people... There's actually... I can't remember the name, but a community of people who are promoting... Pride of the 18th Century. 18th Century Pride, I think it's called, is the Twitter handle and a webpage that does very good work about non-traditional relationships in the 18th century. Now, as for Hamilton and Lawrence, as I said earlier, they wrote in very flowery language. They wanted to be poetic when they spoke, when they wrote. These people were living at the end of the Enlightenment, and they really considered themselves enlightened. That being said, the communication between Lawrence and Hamilton and others seemed to indicate a love. And there was a form, they did love each other. And that is unquestionable. But if there was ever a physical relationship, first of all, that could never be proven. And second of all, is highly unlikely because even though they weren't necessarily all as God-fearing as people had been for centuries, these were God-fearing people, and they primarily would have been very nervous about that kind of activity, especially at a time where these were the lawmakers and being homosexual was still illegal. So, probably not would be my estimation of the love letters. Although Baron von Steuben, who came over from Germany, from Prussia, was almost 100% homosexual, and he's the one who came and wrote the handbook that was used for 100 years for the United States Army at Valley Forge, turned us into an army. Probably the manliest man that ever did man, and he was most certainly a homosexual, and carried along a little dog, and was an overall great guy, and is buried not far from me. His story is really fascinating. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'll do a Baron von Steuben video this week because, Steuben was an important officer in the Prussian army and got kicked out for being gay and went to France and tried to get a commission there, and the French were like, no, you can't be gay here either. And he's like, but it's like pre-revolutionary, but it's France, man. And they're like, no. And he's like, but Paris, dude. And they're like, no. And it just so happens that's when he met Silas Deane and soon after Benjamin Franklin, who sent him to the United States to, help us win the war. And I'm ignoring a funeral, basically. There's, again, not a lot of historical context I can put into the funeral here. Mulligan's kid was gay and supported it. I have not known that. I don't know a lot about Mulligan's children. I will certainly look into that, Mr. Muscleman. That is interesting. Although, I don't know if we talked about this. I did look into it. His name was not John. Nowhere have I been able to locate any reference to his name being John. So, sorry to disappoint you. But great question, because, again, I'm a student of this era of time. I'm still learning about it, and tell me something like his name was John, I gotta go look it up. Unfortunately, it wasn't true. Didn't John's dad mention in a letter that John didn't have an interest in women? Google girl, Gainer girl, 2002. Yes, he did. Now, we do have to keep in mind that, first of all, Lawrence was young. If I'm not mistaken, he actually did marry in Europe. He did have a child in Europe and married there, and then came back to the United States, never to see his family again, because he would die during the war, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And we talked about it earlier, how he dies in Act 1. But I believe the letter you're referencing is from even before that, and he was still a young man, and, you know, not being interested in a girl could be interpreted as, like, not interested in getting married, which could be interpreted as not interested in getting married yet, because he's a young man trying to make a name for himself. And then, as today, people want to establish themselves in a career before then. And that's my favorite line in the play. Can we get back to politics, please? John Adams pooped the bed. Yeah, kind of. Hamilton's gone. Facing Aaron Burr with his own faction. He's not really facing Aaron Burr. Again, this was a time in the United States where whoever got the most votes was president, whoever got the second most votes was vice president. They would change that with the 12th Amendment during Jefferson's first term, because clearly it was a problem, because they kept tying. The Democratic Republicans wanted so bad to have Jefferson be president that they all voted for both Burr and Jefferson. Before this, it was like, Adams got a bunch of votes and won, and Jefferson got a bunch of votes and came second, and then other people got votes also. Same thing with Washington. But for Jefferson, and this is, I'd say, the 7th very important political song, not in the Washington administration anymore, but for early American Republic. And this is a great line coming up. Don't let them know what you're against, what you're for. Shout at her. It's 1800, ladies. Tell your husbands, vote for Burr. Now, he was not handing out pamphlets. Again, he stood for the office. But as I was saying, they wanted the Democrats to win so bad that they all voted for Jefferson and Burr. And since it was a tie, it went to the House of Representatives. For 36 ballots, I believe, they kept all voting the same. Until eventually, as this song indicates, the decision was made for a Federalist to withhold one of their votes. Just one. Because they were afraid, the Federalists were afraid if they withheld a vote, all the Democrats were afraid if they withheld a vote, then someone would vote for Adams and he'd win. Like, it was that close. Now, at this point, the government had moved to Washington, D.C., and Aaron Burr, actually, I'm not sure if he had made it to D.C. yet because he was waiting for his vote. So he probably still would have been in New York. But Hamilton was in New York. And there was a gentleman named James Bayard who was one of the people voting. Now, they're asking Hamilton what his opinion is. Because even though he's not in the public eye anymore, he's like still behind the scenes leading the Federalist Party. He had been the leader of the Federalist Party the whole time. So, unlike we see indicated here, Alexander Hamilton did not stand on a rooftop and just shout to the world, vote for Jefferson. What he did is he wrote to Bayard and said, hey, listen, I know we disagree with everything Jefferson wants to do as a politician. And I know Aaron Burr and Jefferson very well at this point. But Aaron Burr could be a dangerous man as president. And I believe his quote is, we cannot be, I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing, but we do not want to be responsible for what might happen to the nation and the world if Aaron Burr is president. Now, this was written in a private letter, so it didn't lead directly to the duel, but Hamilton was in New York, Bayard was in Washington, D.C., and he wrote to Bayard, who then was Hamilton's mouthpiece amongst the Federalists, and said, we need to choose someone to vote for Jefferson, essentially, or abstain or vote for someone random. He couldn't bring himself to vote for Jefferson. He voted for someone random. So it wasn't really Hamilton shouting from the rooftops. He wrote to a henchman, more or less, who did the voting for him. But, you know, this kind of did ruin Burr's career. Because, unfortunately, Burr didn't have anything to do with it. People were voting for him. But Jefferson did hold a grudge against him for this. What's interesting is Burr ends up, at the end of Jefferson's first term, he's running again and doesn't ask Burr to run for re-election. He asks George Clinton, who had been governor of New York throughout the American Revolution, about 20 years. Then, as I said before, was replaced by John Jay, and then becomes governor again of swing state New York. And then so since George Clinton, current governor of New York, starts to run for vice president, Aaron Burr, former vice president, or soon to be former vice president, says, you know what? I'm from New York. I'm going to take your job. And he starts running for governor. And it is this race that eventually leads to the conversations and publications that lead to the duel between Burr and Hamilton. And that's the letters that the correspondence right here that they're sending back to each other is spurred from years of conflict. Like, Burr knows that Hamilton's the one who controlled the Federalists to vote for Jefferson. He's not super angry about that, though, because, like, obviously Jefferson was the one everyone expected to be president. He didn't really expect to be the president and beat Jefferson. He didn't actively not try and be president, but so it's hard to blame Burr for anything of that. But it is the running for governor of New York, a swing state that has a lot from both parties, and could easily turn Federalist. Now, as Matthew pointed out before, this is not why Aaron Burr was considered a traitor at the time. After he loses New York State, he duels with Hamilton, and then runs, because it's illegal in New York and New Jersey. He's politically embarrassed, though legally he didn't really do much wrong in the eyes of the time. I know a lot of Hamilton defenders don't agree with me and consider him a murderer. No, they were gentlemen doing gentlemanly things and settling a dispute, as far as they saw it. So he runs, and what Burr decides to do is say, hey, we just bought Louisiana. I'm thinking about going filibustering. Now, filibustering had a different meaning back then than it has now. Filibustering was recruiting an army and invading Mexico, or at the time called New Spain, because it was owned by Spain. Now, he went and tried to do this, and along the way, got in some trouble, because James Wilkinson, who is the great American villain, got involved. James Wilkinson, for most of the Adams, Jefferson, and Madison administrations, was the highest ranking officer in the United States Army. Let me say this again. James Wilkinson was the highest ranking officer in the United States Army. During this time, he was working for Spain as a secret agent to give information on the United States. His agent name was Agent 13. I'm not just making this up. Look into it. He is the great villain of the American Revolution, and it was Burr's discussions with him that, like, he actually contacted Jefferson and lied to get Burr put on trial for treason, and then he, like, admitted to being a liar, but, like, no one seemed to care. James Wilkinson, awful person. And that trial for treason is what really made Burr a villain to the public at large. Now, I do want to end this story because we're in this, the duel's coming up. I don't know if they said it yet, because I was talking, but they talk about William P. Van Ness. The doctor turned around so he can have deniability, as we talked about last week. That's how it worked. They're not only near the same spot as Sun died, but they're using the same guns that were provided by John Barker Church, who was Hamilton's brother-in-law. Angelica Schuyler's husband, who's not a lot of fun, which, as we discussed last week, is not true. He was a lot of fun. But it is his guns they're using. They may have had, excuse me, a hair trigger. So at the time, just showing up to the duel sometimes gave satisfaction. Sometimes firing into the air would give satisfaction. And what often happened is if you were really angry, you would shoot for the extremities. Hit him in the arm, he'll get hurt, he'll survive, you're good. So now, again, this book talks about the duel. Founding Brothers, I highly recommend it. Now, Hamilton, it sounds like, now again, everyone turned their back. The doctor and the two other guys there, and I do want to talk to them because I couldn't, they say all three people real quick, and sounds like Hamilton fired in the air. And then Burr attempted to do a shot. Now, they say that, like, he was not a great shot. Ask his friends in the army. Again, as I said, that's not true. He was in the army. He did some valiant things fighting for the American Revolution. Granted, weapons at the time didn't aim very well. And these guns, as I said, might have had a hair trigger, which meant it would have shot too quick for him. So he probably was aiming for an extremity and shot, and the gun was not aligned properly, and it hit Hamilton in the body. Now, these bullets didn't fire very fast. It didn't go through the body. It went in the body and bounced around. And as you can imagine, having a hot piece of metal bounce around your insides can do a lot of destruction at a time where surgery wasn't really great. And that's why when Hamilton gets hit, he goes down, and the doctor runs over and he says, "'Tis a mortal wound, doctor." He knew. He could feel it cutting up his insides. So he knew it was a mortal wound. Now, I do want to mention real quick, while they're having this strange slow-mo death scene, the people who were there, the seconds, William P. Van Ness was a friend of Aaron Burr, and friend of Aaron Burr, and Nathaniel Pendleton was the only one who was really their age. William P. Van Ness was a lot younger. Nathaniel Pendleton was part of the Pendleton family of Virginia, though he had moved to Georgia and eventually settled in New York and became friendly with Hamilton. And the real interesting character is Dr. David Hosack, whose name they don't even mention. He's the doctor that he knew. Dr. David Hosack was friends with both men. He was a part of the duel. He turned his back, so he didn't see. No one actually saw. That's why we don't know for sure. He's the one who tried to keep Hamilton alive on the boat. They had to row him back across the water, brought him to his house. He kept him alive so his family could show up and say goodbye. And Hosack would go on to become very wealthy, and in fact even opened the first botanical garden in New York City, and would be a patron of the arts as that started to become a thing, and of scientists. In fact, there's a young man called Samuel Morse, who you might recognize that last name as Morse code. He's the one who didn't invent the telegraph but made it popular in the United States. Dr. David Hosack was one of the people who first invested in him, though it was when he was an artist and invested in his paintings, but did contribute to the development of the telegraph, and which is the first major improvement in communications since the Postal Service, and in a fashion led to the internet that we have today. Dr. David Hosack is a very interesting character. Now, the rest of the play, we're going to be pretty much just kind of sad and bummed out, because our main character's dead. I do want to see if there's any questions or anything like that. A few things. I read that Hamilton at Philip's funeral had to be held up by family members because he was shaking so bad. Yeah, they used to have fainting couches too, although that's because women's corsets were tied so tight they couldn't really breathe. Oh, Nacho, okay. I hope your mom's okay. Hopefully we'll see you soon. That's a bummer. But we have to do what we have to do. Washington's back from the dead. I guess that's why he's wearing white. Jefferson, it is a work of genius. And I couldn't undo it if I tried. And I tried. Yeah, Jefferson tried. And once it was there, it's there. It's still here. We live in Hamilton's America. In a session, he did essentially make us solvent as a country. I hate this line. Every other founding father story gets told. Hi, I have a website where I talk about founding fathers who never get their story told. You think it makes me so angry because, like, Hamilton's been on the $10 bill in all of our pockets for, I don't know, our entire lives? Like, and every other founding father gets to grow old. Cool. Like your friend John Lawrence, who died when he was in his early 20s? Cool. Cool. And I'm sorry this bothers me. I'm, like, complaining about the play, but I'm picky. I don't like how she... And Eliza Hamilton brings up the orphanage in the last song. The last song is the conclusion of the play. You're supposed to go back over what you've done, and they introduce the orphanage. Eliza Hamilton opened one of the first orphanages in New York City and helped countless children who had no one else to rely on. She was an amazing person, an amazing founder who was extremely important to the United States. So, bugs me that, like, they bring it up now, but of course it did happen decades after Hamilton was dead. She does also go to see the Washington Monument when it's built, although it's only halfway built and then waits like 50 years to get finished. That's why it's different colors if you look at it. Will they tell our story? Yeah. Lin-Manuel Miranda will tell your story. Now, I've read a lot about her last gasp for breath recently, what that means, and apparently it means something different to every actress who plays Eliza. Yeah, you helped raise children. I said that. I just didn't think Lawrence didn't love his wife. He only married her out of pity. Right. It does sound like Lawrence knocked up a very wealthy young woman and therefore had to get married. Like, had to. Back then, it was like, no, you have to. Or you're not a gentleman, and therefore you cannot get all of the fantastic amenities that come with being a gentleman in 18th century South Carolina. So, get married. And then he kind of, like, ran right back to do the war. I actually don't know, because John would then go back to Europe and help finalize the negotiations with Netherlands that his father had started before his father got captured and got put in the Tower of London. I don't believe he went back and saw his family while he was there, although I'm not 100% certain. Okay, yeah, there's that gasp, I guess. And that seems to be it. I'm assuming they'll all come out and take their bows now. I only watched so far into it, into the 2.5 hours. I watched about 2 hours and 15 minutes. I was like, I get it. I've heard it enough times and had my complaints about the final track. Okay, they're doing their bows. Lin-Manuel Miranda, bravo! Like, it is a tremendous thing he did for his country. This is a fantastic recountenance of the American Revolution. As I said earlier, you have to take certain artistic liberties, or artistic license, when you make any kind of content of this nature. Not content of this nature. I'm not taking any licenses. I'm giving you as accurately as I understand it. I am going to pull this off while they bow. Whoa! So much quieter in here. If you guys have any final questions before we go, let me know. As I have said, excuse me, thank you all for watching. I tried to go live a bunch of times this week, and it just didn't feel right. I know a lot of YouTubers who do that. It's just not for me. I'm going to go back to what I was doing, which all these people, I got a lot of growth recently, which I'm amazingly grateful for. And as soon as people came, I changed what I was doing. Really dumb. So I will be Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, putting out regular videos, and Wednesday we will have our hour-long live discussion of the articles I wrote this week. That being said, this was a lot of fun. You guys have been watching for like an hour and a half. So if you really enjoy these live videos where I like review content like this, let me know. I was thinking about adding one other live thing, like maybe we take a movie and watch a movie and discuss it as we go, or a television show like the John Adams miniseries, for example, which I think is hard to find. I have it on DVD, but I don't know if it's on any streaming services. But I know like Turn is on streaming services, and I can talk a lot about that spy ring. I know a whole lot about that spy ring. I grew up where that spy ring is involved, and one of the men of the spy ring is the founder buried in my hometown. So, let me know. There are some questions here. It's an emotional beat with Hamilton being an orphan. Oh, I didn't even make that connection. Him and Burr were orphan. I mean, Burr was in college when he became orphan, but an orphan nonetheless. That is a great connection, Tarot. I didn't even think about that. Whammy. Now I feel bad. Kind of. Not really. Muscle Man, he was drunk when they made the child, so out of pity he married her. Yeah. I don't know if he was drunk or not, but I don't know if it was, I don't know if pity is the right word. Because like if he pities anyone, it's the child. I think it's more like a sense of honor. As I've said before, these people, especially the men, were so interested in maintaining their honor. That's why dueling was a thing. Because you've offended my honor. It's not even like you're being mean to me. It's like, no, you've offended my honor, and I need my reputation to remain the same. Yeah, so we are at an hour 20. I think the second act was a little shorter than the first one. Thank you guys for coming. I'm looking forward to the Anti-Federalist Fridays. Matthew, I am also. I put out another Federalist, the Pre-Federalist, this week. I have been trying to organize and determine how to do the Anti-Federalist because now that I've looked into it, there are actually more Anti-Federalist than Federalist papers. Because the Federalist papers were 3 guys, although John Jay got 6, so really just 2 guys writing these articles. The Anti-Federalists were a whole bunch of people writing articles all over the place. Some of them had a bunch of it was a series of articles. So what I think I'm going to do is instead of doing each individual article, I will do each, like for example, the Sentinel had, I think, like 50 papers. And I'll probably just do one article about the Sentinel itself. Maybe I'll do an article that sums up the Anti-Federalist arguments first as a whole, because there were a lot of them, but they were essentially all the same. Thanks, Tara. Thank you so much for coming. A shotgun marriage is kind of... Muscle Man, that's a good way to put it. Matthew, I was thinking about doing Federalist Fridays here, like maybe every Friday talking about a different Federalist, because I've been putting them into the live video, but now that I'm not doing them anymore, I thought it might be fun to like specifically do one video and look at each Federalist and its place in the American Pantheon. So let me know if that interests you, or if there's a video, an American Revolution movie or TV series that you'd like me to cover in the same nature as this. I am all ears 100%. I want to give you guys as much information as I can get out of my brain, and I want to learn as much as I can from you guys. You've made a lot of great points along the way here, things I didn't consider, like Hamilton was an orphan, that's why it's important she did the orphanage. Like, great job. Great job. So I am going to go. I'm going to end the stream now because I'm starting to get a little sweaty from all this talking. Again, appreciate you guys 1,000 times. 10 viewers now. People are coming in right at the wrong time because we are closing out. A bunch of people just came in at the end. Sorry to disappoint you. But we're an hour and a half in and saying goodbye. Thank you so much for coming, though. Definitely like and subscribe so you can see more content like this that you missed. I will see you guys very soon. And as always, round bottom.